You know, there's this whole other internet, a hidden, anonymous world, right below the surface of the one we use every day. And for a while, the undisputed king of that world was a single website, the Silk Road. Today, we're diving into the true story of how this notorious dark web marketplace was born and how it all came crashing down.
It earned a nickname that says it all: the Amazon of drugs. And the reason was terrifyingly simple. You could buy pretty much any substance you could think of and just have it show up at your front door in a plain brown box. This wasn't some shady back alley deal. This was a slick $1.2 billion empire, all built on one thing: total anonymity.
So who was the mastermind pulling the strings? Get this. It's this guy, Ross Ulbricht. On one hand, you have a literal Eagle Scout from Texas, studied physics. Friends said he was just a sweet guy. On the other hand, the architect of a massive online drug market. How on earth does someone go from Boy Scout to drug kingpin? That's really the core question of this whole story.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this whole thing down. We'll start with the libertarian dream that sparked the entire idea. Then we'll watch the Silk Road's insane rise and its founder's descent into a digital crime boss. After that, we'll follow the digital breadcrumbs that led investigators right to him, cover the dramatic takedown in a public library, and finally, try to make sense of the complicated legacy he left behind.
Okay, let's rewind, all the way back to the beginning. Before the billions of dollars, before the FBI, there was just an idea. An idea in the mind of a young guy who honestly thought he could change the world.
You know, if you just looked at Ross's background, you would never, ever guess future dark web mastermind. He was an Eagle Scout, grew up in a good family, and everyone who knew him just thought he was a nice, kind of quiet dude. And it's that exact contrast that makes this story so wild.
But underneath that all-American exterior was a hardcore libertarian. Ross believed, with every fiber of his being, that the government had zero right to control what people did with their own bodies. So for him, creating an anonymous free market wasn't just a business plan. Oh no, it was a political revolution.
So you've got this big radical idea, but how do you actually build it? I mean, an untraceable, illegal marketplace from nothing? It turns out it took a perfect storm of technologies that were just starting to bubble up.
The recipe for the Silk Road really had three key ingredients. First, you needed a place to hide. That was the Tor browser, which basically scrambles your location so no one knows where you are. Second, you needed a way to pay. That was Bitcoin, the anonymous digital currency. And third, you needed the store itself, which Ross coded from scratch and called the Silk Road.
But even with the site built, he had that classic startup problem, right? No buyers without sellers, and no sellers without buyers. So what did Ross do? He became the first seller himself. He literally grew his own magic mushrooms just to get the ball rolling and prove the concept worked.
And man, did it work. The site absolutely exploded. But as the money started pouring in, that young idealist, the one who just wanted to change the world, he started a slow but very real transformation into a ruthless crime boss. And you could see it in what was being sold. At first it was mushrooms, weed, party drugs. But soon things got dark. Heroin started showing up, then guns, fake passports, hacking tools. At one point, a moderator even asked if they should allow the sale of human kidneys. And Ross, sticking to his radical free market principles, basically said, let the market decide.
As the stakes got higher and higher, Ross knew he needed to protect himself. An online mentor gave him a brilliant idea: adopt an alias from the movie The Princess Bride, the Dread Pirate Roberts. The whole point of that character is that the name gets passed down from person to person. It was the perfect cover. If one DPR gets caught, the legend just continues with someone else.
But here's the thing about online anonymity. It's fragile. And while Ross was busy building his empire as the Dread Pirate Roberts, a whole bunch of government agencies were desperately trying to find the man behind the curtain, just looking for one tiny mistake, one little crack in his digital fortress. And that was the million-dollar question for them. How do you unmask a ghost? For 2 years, the FBI, the DEA, they were all stumped. The big break didn't come from some high-tech hack. Nope, it came from an old-school, detail-obsessed tax inspector from the IRS.
This IRS agent, Gary Alford, had a hunch. He figured the site's founder must have messed up somewhere, way back in the early days. He started digging and found a user named Altoid promoting the site on a mushroom forum. He kept digging that username and found another post from Altoid, this time looking to hire a developer. And right there, in that old forum post, was the fatal mistake: an email address,
rossulbricht@gmail.com.
That was the first domino. The FBI had already found the physical server for the Silk Road in Iceland, but they couldn't prove it was Ross's. Then, on a conference call, Gary Alford, the IRS agent, just happens to mention that Ross used the username Frosty on a coding forum. And the line goes completely silent. The FBI agents knew something he didn't. The name of the server they had just seized was Frosty.
They had him, dead to rights. Now, they just had to catch him, but they had to do it perfectly, because one wrong move and all their evidence could disappear in a keystroke.
The plan was actually pretty simple, but it had to be executed flawlessly. Their biggest fear was his laptop. If he closed the lid, everything would instantly encrypt and the evidence would be gone. So they decided to catch him in a public place, create a huge distraction, grab the open laptop, and then make the arrest.
On October 1st, 2013, they put the plan into action. They found Ross in the sci-fi section of a San Francisco library. He's just sitting there, typing away. Suddenly, two undercover agents start having a loud, fake argument. Ross turns his head for just a second to see what's going on, and in that instant, another agent swoops in and snatches the laptop right off his table. And on the screen, clear as day, was the master control panel for the entire Silk Road. They got him.
But the arrest wasn't the end of the story. It was really just the beginning of a messy final chapter, full of courtroom drama, shocking corruption, and a legacy that, honestly, we're still debating today.
Ross Ulbricht was found guilty on every single charge, and the judge wanted to send a message. He wanted to make an example of Ross to scare off anyone else thinking of starting a dark web market. The sentence was staggering, 2 life sentences plus 40 years, with absolutely no chance of parole.
But here's where the story gets really complicated. During the investigation, it came out that 2 of the federal agents on the case were themselves corrupt. They were stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars in Bitcoin from the Silk Road. And their sentences? About 6 years each. This huge difference is a massive point of controversy for Ross's supporters to this day.
So did the judge's harsh sentence actually work as a deterrent? Well, the answer was a loud and immediate no. So you can't really put an idea in prison. Almost as soon as the original Silk Road was shut down, Silk Road 2.0 popped up, and then dozens of other copycats. Ross was in a cage, but the digital ghost he'd created was out in the wild.
Which really brings us back to that central question. Who was Ross Ulbricht? Was he a libertarian pioneer, a visionary fighting for freedom in the digital age? Or was he just a reckless kingpin whose creation spiraled out of control and caused a whole lot of harm? The answer, much like the dark web itself, is still pretty murky.